Some of the TERFs have referred to you as racist. They've called you Islamophobic.
Feminists are amongst the most awfully behaved of any women I've ever met. There are literally women who call themselves feminists who will talk about manspreading, for God's sake, but they won't talk about Pakistani Muslim gangs. Free yourselves, ladies. Free your faces.
Someone who so-called passes. They've had the breast implants. They may be post-op, as you say. They will say, where is this person supposed to go?
I really don't care where these men go. And I think if they want to campaign for a third space for themselves, happy days.
In the celebrity world, having a trans child is the new must-have. It's the new fashion accessory.
My trans kid had his top surgery at NYU.
I wish celebrities would just go back to getting themselves a chihuahua. That was
Yeah.
far more fun.
Hello, welcome back to the Brendan O'Neill Show with me, Brendan O'Neill, and my special guest this week, Kellie-Jay Keen. Kellie-Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. It's been ages since we last spoke, I feel. A lot has happened in that time. I mean, just to rattle off a few, we've had Donald Trump's executive order saying that men aren't women, basically. We've had the Supreme Court ruling here in the UK, pretty much saying the same thing in terms of equality law. In equality law, a woman is a woman and a man is a man. We've had Labour politicians here in the UK saying, oh, we always knew what a woman was. We were just playing around for a few years. So lots of stuff has happened. It's a credit to women like you who've been fighting this lunacy for a long time. I guess I want to start off by asking you where you think things are at. I mean, it looks good, but presumably this madness is still out there somewhere.
I'm just really mindful that we don't get too excited because really this whole thing is about what will people do, not what they'll say. Because all along, they've said some nice things, but like, as you just already noted, they say it out of both sides of their mouths. So one, they go, I support trans rights. I've always wanted women to have their own spaces. You know, and those things just don't really mix.
Yeah.
And they're nonsensical and nobody explains what they mean. So I'm going to wait until the government comes down hard on, say, a local leisure centre that's still allowing men into their changing rooms, or until there's some legislation that's pushed that says a woman is absolutely must have female only care, say like an incapacitated woman or a woman that can't consent, must have female only care unless she is deemed, you know, it's absolutely essential that she doesn't. So until we see that, I'm not really convinced. It's only words, and they were only words before, and the Supreme Court ruling did nothing to change anything. Besides say, yes, a woman is an adult human female, or, you know, it's a biological category, which anyone with half a brain would know. Because if you have an Equality Act where you have sex as a protected characteristic and gender reassignment, even though I think that's a nonsensical, stupid, shouldn't exist, hate the Equality Act. But with that in existence, it could never have meant anything other than sex.
Yeah.
Sex couldn't have meant... The female sex could never have included men. So I'm just going to wait and see what genuinely happens.
Yeah, I think you're right to keep the champagne on ice. And we can talk about why we might want to do that in a minute. But just in terms of what's been happening, I wanted to get your view on the fact that people are now coming out and saying, yes, a woman is an adult human female. You know, that's basically, as you say, that's basically what the Supreme Court said. Everyone gave them a round of applause. Some Labour leaders are saying it. Even Keir Starmer is kind of getting there finally. Now, you are someone, more than anyone else, who's been attacked for saying those very words over the past 10 years, for putting that poster up saying a woman is an adult human female, for making the T-shirt that people wear. People will remember when you got set upon by a feral mob in New Zealand, or when you've just been attacked here in Britain and you've been insulted and banned and all the rest of it. What does it feel like for the woman behind adult human female to now see other people getting rounds of applause and pats on the back for basically saying the same thing, even if they don't mean it?
Well, it's kind of been the story of my life. It's been the story of activism. And there is this there is a sanitized approach to all this that I don't particularly like, and I don't think is very good, where many of the women, even women on our side, will couch what victory might look like. Now, I think what victory looks like is no men in women-only spaces. I think victory looks like pre-2004. I think a victory looks like no man is recognised in law as a woman, that things like cross-dressing is seen again as something that maybe it should be very, very fringe, preferably kept at home. So those things are a little bit galling. And this, when you professionalize activism, you compromise and you sort of do it all by committee. And as they famously say, a camel is a horse designed by committee. And I think that is what we're going to see. There are people talking to MPs, and we know those MPs won't talk to me. And so we know that already compromises are being made. You know, the words like accommodating. How do we accommodate? Like, why would we accommodate these men? Why do I have to even think about these men? Like, I don't want to accommodate them. I want them to feel embarrassed and shameful and stay at home, quite frankly. But I can't control that. I would just like it to be that the state can't force me to accommodate these men in any capacity whatsoever. You know, that's what genuine freedom would look like for me.
So where do the problems still lie in your view? So you said that you're not going to celebrate just yet, although you did do a little fist pump when we mentioned a few of those things that have happened, especially the executive order in America, which I thought was such a beautifully worded defense of women and girls' rights. It was extraordinary. And to see Donald Trump signing it surrounded by all those kind of wide-eyed girls who now know that they can play sport and not have to go up against a hulking 14-year-old boy. So good things have happened. Common sense has prevailed in certain areas. It's in the air. But obviously the problem still exists, because this weird cult wasn't just a kind of surface thing, was it? It really did reach into the institutions. It really has infected celebrity culture. It really did become a mainstay of left-wing activism. So presumably it's not going to disappear overnight. So where do you see problems still existing in relation to this?
Oh my gosh, everywhere. We seem to have something weird that's happened in this country where people don't think they have to follow the law, which I think is like certain groups of people definitely don't have to follow the law. I've been talking about this for a long time, that there's certain groups of people that seem to be above the law. And quite frequently, actually, they're very much below the law. Where do I see it going? I see the problems in schools. For example, what do you do with a man who wears his fetish to work, who everyone seems to accept because he's not dressing like a porn star? Everyone thinks, oh, he's, you know, a woman would be able to dress like that. Well, yeah, but he's not a woman. Like, so what if he wears a nice little collared, flowery sundress? He's still wearing his fetish to work in a school with children. So for me, that needs to be eradicated. And I don't think there's anyone advocating for that at all. I just don't get it when it comes to safeguarding. I'd like teachers really to go back to teaching. I know it's like old fashioned, but I would like them just to keep. I don't want to know their first names. I don't want to know what team they support. I don't want to know if they're married. I don't want to know anything about them. I just want them to teach my kids. You know, like when I was little, if you saw your teacher in a supermarket, you couldn't quite understand that they ate food and they lived normal lives. Or you'd find out where they lived and you'd walk quickly past our houses. We've lost some of these kind of natural boundaries between adults and children. And so anyway, I digress massively there. So it's things like unisex changing rooms, like in leisure centres where you have communal, I think they call them changing villages or something insipid. I would like to see that we return back to female and male segregated spaces. And if that causes alarm to men who want to come into women's spaces, then I would suggest those men are quite predatory and they are the men that we most need to keep out.
Yeah. No, listening to you talk about teachers, it really struck me that when we were kids it was amazing if you found out your teacher's first name. It would be like, wow, did you hear what so-and-so's name is? Now they go in and say, I'm non-binary, gender fluid, and these are my personal foibles and interests. But very, very odd. One institution I did want to ask you about is in relation to the NHS, because I think that probably is indicative of the fact that this is still a problem. So there are cases going on at the moment. There's the Sandy Peggy case in Scotland. She's a nurse who just doesn't want to be in a private area with a bloke. There's the Darlington nurses cases, of course, as well. There are other cases where nurses have been reprimanded or punished for correctly gendering male people. So that's indicative of the kind of thing you're talking about, isn't it? Because the NHS is one of the largest institutions, not only in the UK, but in the world. I mean, it employs so many people to look after the health of so many other people. And yet it was infected by this insane religious ideology. So that's not going to go away overnight. How do you see the problems playing out in the intimate area of health? How bad is it there still?
Oh my gosh, it's so bad. But I just listened to you. Like I flinch at male people, just because they're men. And I think it's really interesting because I bet 15 years ago you wouldn't have even dreamed of saying male people. It's it's. I'm so sorry. I don't mean
I'll say
to
blokes from now on.
But it does. It's. I'll tell you what that is, and that's a really clever little trick that makes you think that saying man is kind of rude or coarse or unpleasant. And I think, and I hear women on my side of this debate all the time saying it. I don't mean to have a conversation about this, but it's really indicative of where we are, that people feel it's a little bit like just rude to say man. So anyway, I'll move on. NHS. So I did a Let Women Speak outside of the GMC last week to talk about chest feeding, birthing persons, menstruators, cervix havers, and the way, I mean, I'm sure I don't need to explain to you how they erase language, and they do it, and I guess you just illustrated that. They do it in two ways. You can't say the word woman anymore in the NHS without them feeling it's either exclusionary or includes men. So what they do is when they mean women, they don't use the word woman, so it becomes erased that way. And they dilute it by saying woman, meaning anybody who calls himself a woman. Yeah. And so the NHS is absolutely drowning in this stuff. I did a conservative estimate of about 50 million a year it spends on DEI hires. Now, that's not the policies that they implement or the flags or the NHS badges, but there is a lot of money sloshing around in the NHS. In addition to that, if you have an ideology that says it's a nice thing to call that man a woman, then and you've got cowardly women, and let me just say about those two cases, what's really interesting is those women had to change with those men, which is terrible. But those men were treating patients. And if those men are saying to their colleagues who aren't vulnerable, I mean, they are vulnerable, but in comparison to a patient, they're not. Anything about why won't you undress? Can you imagine the discomfort of someone who's really quite unwell having to put up with that? And I think for me, that's been the thing. It's like teachers, they might make other teachers feel uncomfortable, but it's the kids that I'm thinking about. And in hospitals, I do think it's the patients. And I feel these women are amazing for doing it. But the rot is deep. It will take... Trump did it with an executive order. Like, it doesn't take much. It only takes leadership and the will to do it, which is why I think we wait for what they do as opposed to what they say. So, it's the biggest employer in the country and it's horrendous. I went to my A&E for something something that was urgent, but not kind of death's door urgent. And they had a poster up there for premature or something to do with birth. And it was like birthing people. I left a nice little NHS ideology above health sticker that I produced that they've tried to sue me and say I need to take down, which I have told them I will not. We'll wait and see about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's the language stuff is such an important part of this, and you and others have been talking about that for some time. By the way, I'm more than happy to call these men, and I call them far worse things in some of the pieces I've been writing recently. I think, there comes a point where even analysis is, you kind of move past even that point, and it really just becomes a kind of mick-taking exercise, which I really thought when we saw those protests after the Supreme Court ruling, you just thought, these protests where people are in the streets demanding the right to piss wherever they want, that's literally what they were saying. I mean, there's no point analysing that. You just need to make fun of it. So in relation to the NHS, there are still problems there, as you describe. You've encountered those problems yourself. I know you had issues with your GP as well, I think, because everyone is so captured by this ideology. Why? Explain to us a little bit about what happened, what run-ins you've had, and why you think health is an important area in relation to all of this. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me, but outline a little bit about what it is about health in particular where you think segregation by sex is really important.
Well, they know that the quickest way to get someone out of hospital, the quickest way to heal is to be relaxed, feel safe and secure, like have your basic needs met. That's why actually it's better for everyone to have their individual rooms. But single sex, I guess, is the next best thing. So we know that it will save the NHS money. Like if we just want to talk in terms that people might care about, it will save millions of pounds if you make sure that women feel safe and secure and men feel safe and secure and maybe not embarrassed. Men don't want to go into hospital and walk around with their dressing gown open with a load of women on the ward either. So I think if we can focus on that sort of aspect, I think millions is spent on this nonsense. We've got a ward opening, a whole hospital wing or ward in Chelsea and Westminster that's going to focus on phalloplasties, which is look, I don't have a penis, but I think they're quite special and unique items in a man.
Yeah.
I think they're a bit more sensitive than my forearm as well. So they cut the skin off a forearm, they fashion it into something that remotely from sort of 3 miles with the naked eye might look like a penis, that doesn't work, that doesn't have any feeling. And the reason they use the forearm is because it doesn't have as much body hair. And then they get a skin graft from the leg and they'll put that on the forearm to make it. They want to do, I really don't want to exaggerate, and I'm pretty sure I'm not when I say they want to do 250 a year phalloplasties in an NHS hospital. Now, I think, and I don't know this to be true, but I think the reason doctors are pushing for it on the NHS is then they can switch to a private practice with the NHS training, the NHS money, the NHS space and wing of the hospital. And then those individual doctors who are pushing for this can then switch it to a private practice, part of their 50-50 NHS private, and they can make an absolute killing, metaphorically and probably literally.
Yeah.
So that's why.
Yeah, that's very well put. I mean, we really are in Dr. Frankenstein territory in relation to all of this. And I wrote a piece recently saying, these are the lobotomies of our time. And I'm confident that in the future we will look back on them in that way. It would be remiss of me not to ask you about toilets. Whoever thought, going back 10 or 15 years, that toilets would be such a flashpoint in the cultural and political arena, but they are. And changing rooms, I guess. I took my nephews to Primark recently, and I was actually quite pleased to see that Primark now has 2 options for changing, which is anyone can go into one area and only women can go into the other. And I thought that's probably a good way to do it. I mean, I would still like to see men and women because I just think it's reflective of the world we live in and biological truth. But as long as women have an area in which they can change away from blokes, then that's good. So I was happy to see that in Primark. But there are lots of other places where that isn't the case. And there are still lots of men going into women's bathrooms and, in fact, increasingly making a political point of doing so, especially in the aftermath of the Supreme Court ruling here, where they've said, actually, we're going to do it even more now. We'll urinate and defecate wherever we please, and we don't care what J.K. Rowling says about it. I mean, this really awful approach to such important areas for people who need to relieve themselves. where does that stand? Is it against the law for these men to be doing this now, or has that not quite changed yet? How do you see those kind of intimate changing in toilet areas in relation to this discussion?
Well, it's an Equality Act thing, isn't it? So I guess whoever owns the toilets would be... I don't think it is against the law for a man. We had a social contract, didn't we? You know, good men stay out, so bad men stand out. Bad men stand out. So I don't think it is against the law. I think it would be against the law if my local swimming pool that had a communal female changing room allowed men in there. I think it would be against the Equality Act. But there's this thing in the Equality Act called proportionate and legitimate aims, and that's up for grabs, really. Like, what is... Basically, you have to say that man, like, let's say he's a post-op, and you're saying that he is a threat to women. Like, that's your proportionate and legitimate aim, is that you will have to say, to keep him out, who is legally recognised as a woman, you say that he is fundamentally a threat to women. Otherwise, you're saying that he's not a woman. And if we just went back to single sex and said, actually, it is unlawful for them to enter that space, that would be great. I can't see that happening.
Yeah, I know, without the kind of thing you described earlier, a very firm intervention, because that's the great tragedy in relation to all of this. As you say, we had a social contract, we had social understanding. Men knew that they shouldn't go into certain areas, and if any man did, he'd get a real telling off from those other blokes. I mean, all those things existed for centuries and they fell apart very quickly. They can't really be repaired by law either. It needs, more of a cultural shift. I think I know your answer to this question, but I want to ask you anyway, which is that you will often see online, people will put up a picture of a man who identifies as a woman, I'll do quote marks and all that, who they think looks like a woman. They think it's someone who so-called passes. So they've had the breast implants. They may be post-op, as you say. They might pass as a woman if you kind of see them from afar, etc., etc. They will say, where is this person supposed to go? Do you honestly expect them to go into the men's bathroom and the men's changing area? Do you honestly expect them to get undressed in front of men at the swimming pool? What's your answer to that question?
Yeah, or they can stay home. I mean, it's up to them. I'm happy for them. I don't care. I know that's probably not very nice. I genuinely don't care. I care about women-only spaces. If those men have rendered themselves more at risk by breast implants and so on, then, that's up to them. It's the same as the girls who shed loads of testosterone and have a full beard. Like, okay, well, you made your bed. Like, if you make women feel unsafe, then you can't come in the women's changing rooms. It's not my fault. I didn't do it. I feel compassion for them. And if they see the error of their ways, I think it must be mortifying. And I cannot imagine inflicting such harm upon myself and only having myself to blame. And society and your mum and dad and doctors and so on. But I think ultimately they would blame themselves because that would be kind of a normal human response. But no, I really don't care where these men go. And I think if they want to campaign for a third space for themselves, best of luck. Great. Happy days. But I can't spend any of my time worrying about where ornified, porn-sick men end up. As long as it's not in the women's, I don't care.
Yeah, it is, it's that kind of not thinking through the consequences of what you do. People radically alter their body, take drugs that they probably shouldn't be taking, or definitely shouldn't be taking in most cases, and don't think about the consequences of that when they are presenting in the real world, in the public space, in certain areas. And I think, that's partly because they've deluded themselves. It's partly because they've been lied to by the medical establishment, the political establishment, the cultural elite, who told them, take these drugs and hey presto, you'll change sex overnight. And it's just not true. What about in relation to what's happening outside of schools, outside of the health system, in the broader culture, I guess? Because there was a period of time, this more than most, we know it has spiked as well. There was a period of time where if you didn't repeat the religious mantra, trans women are women, if you didn't use the correct terms and say the right things and hold the right views, I mean, you were in potential trouble. You could be blacklisted from university campuses. You could have tomato soup emptied over your head. You could, it was a risky business to be on the side of biological truth. It feels to me that that's changing now, and you can say these things. You can certainly say them on X because Elon Musk has changed the culture on X, but it feels like you can say them in the real world as well. How big a shift has taken place, I guess, in the culture more broadly?
I don't have too much experience of it because I've always just said it. So that's been... So I'm back on X. I was banned for 4.5 years.
Yep.
I'm still not monetized.
Right.
I'm not monetized anywhere, like anywhere at all. So I'd like to see. People say the pioneers do really well. I think the pioneers, we're the ones that get killed, and it's the settlers that are all right. But yeah, so I think it's changed. I think more and more women. It's really interesting because I thought the Supreme Court thing would happen, and then the whole movement would collapse, and there'd be no more. And it certainly has diminished somewhat. But it also welcomed more women in who didn't feel so afraid of losing their jobs or being arrested. So it did have that flip side. Like, we've had an absolute huge influx of people joining Let Women Speak and Party of Women because they're not so afraid. So that's certainly been a shift. And obviously Twitter has been, like X, has been massive.
Yeah.
In being able to have these conversations. And lots of people have joined the bandwagon quite late, but, they're still welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. I flit on the Johnny come latelys. I kind of flit between feeling generous and feeling angry and like, where have you been for so long? There are still some notable columnists and others who have still not commented on this issue. People who've been writing books for the past 10 years on how to be a woman or what is a woman or whatever, and they can't even intervene in this discussion about womanhood. I won't name any names, but you can if you like. I need to ask you about the fallout then from the Supreme Court ruling. So we've talked about that, and you said there that you thought maybe things would just fall apart once that ruling had been made because it was, the highest court in the land here in the UK, basically saying that, grow up, a woman is a woman, a man is a man. It's a really well worded ruling. It doesn't apply to all of society. It doesn't repair all the madnesses. It's concerned with the equality law, so it's limited, but it's a sensible ruling. So when you saw the response to it, which were those protests in London, Manchester, Edinburgh, I think some people actually did urinate in public in protest against this ruling. Did you think that was the dying gasp of a weird movement, or do you think it's a kind of regrouping of that movement? Are they going to push back harder? How do you see it, the fallout from that ruling playing out in relation to the trans activists?
Well, I think the trans activists will double down and they will sort of insist that they're a persecuted minority. And look, I mean, what woman hasn't gone and urinated in the street as a protest? Like every week, that's me. So I just thought it was perfect. I mean, look, they've always done the best work. Like, the best way to convince anybody that these men shouldn't be in our spaces is just have a look at the men. There was a convicted violent criminal who specifically named me in front of the police and said I should be afraid. And obviously the police were very quick. They've arrested him. He's back in prison. Just like if he'd done a mass misgendering. But of course, nobody said anything. And the police record every time I go out, there's a police officer when I do my events, there's a police officer recording my words and filming me just in case I do a hurty word hate crime. I think they will keep fighting it. I think their identity, there are some that are just nasty, most of them are just nasty misogynists who are just the sort of people that would be at the end of a loud hailer, whatever the cause, and they fancy themselves as something. And then there's a lot of these kids that have had helicopter parenting, who are spoiled, entitled, maybe slightly personality disordered, who don't know, who have no understanding that they're in a cult and they're just a mere pawn in this horrible cult. And I think for them, they still think they're fighting the good fight. So I think it might take them a little while to adjust to the fact that slightly the grown-ups have kind of stepped back in the room and said, put your toys away. And I think they're going to be the most damaged. And then obviously you've got, the invested mammies. In Ireland, there's a group called Mammies of Trans Kids. They're so repulsive. Women that celebrate kind of transing their kids, like eradicating their sexual function and fertility. And I talked about this for a very, very long time. And the person I talked to was about Posie Green. And for these people, I think they're going to go on some time.
Yeah.
Because they have done the ultimate harm to their children. And with Posie Green, she can't face it so much that she created a whole career around helping other parents take their children down this very harmful path. And I genuinely think when she was doing it, I think she thought she was doing it out of love for her child. I really do. I don't think she thought, I'm going to ruin my child's life. So those parents are certainly going to be rooted very much in trying to carry this on. And then obviously you have their children, especially boys. And I don't want to guess the consequences of a boy finding out as a man that he had his sexual function stolen by his parents and the medical profession, and what he might do to try and gain vengeance for that. Because I don't know how angry I'd be, but I think I would be murderous. That's what I think. So, repercussions are coming.
The fact that we live in an era where boys are essentially being chemically castrated, and a lot of them are just gay kids, or they would have grown up to be gay, or they are autistic, or they have other issues. I mean, it is just extraordinary. But on the people who have a vested interest, how much of an issue do you think they will be? Because the thing is, in the celebrity world, it sometimes seems as having a trans child is the new must-have. It's the new fashion accessory. I mean, they really do all have trans children, which I think is indicative of, the gullibility of celebrities and the way they will fall for any new fad if it makes them feel good or look good. So you got the celebrity world, you got Hollywood, where it's still quite a powerful ideology. There are people in the media here in the UK who have a vested interest, either because their kids have had some of this treatment, or because they've made their name through trumpeting this cause, through saying, protect the dolls, or trans women are women, or whatever else you're supposed to say. So there's a lot of vested interest, whether it's personal, political, ideological, and these are influential people. These are people involved in media and culture. How much of a problem do you think they are? How much do you, someone literally you, have to take the fight to those kinds of people?
I think celebrity is waning. So I don't know how much weight we need to put in whether or not they shape culture anymore, because I don't know that they do. I think COVID, whatever you think of COVID, I think it gave us all a little look behind the curtain. And I think we all saw some really kind of quite talentless people. So I think when it comes to what we will do, what we will be influenced by, I think is not like it was 10 years ago. They're not shiny, oh my God, how do they do it? They're like, oh, anyone could do that. Oh, they're really quite dull. Without script and lights and a camera, they're just regular. In fact, they're not even kind of that sparkly at all. So maybe that's one thing. I think the other thing about celebrity, I've thought about this a lot, why that happens. And I think what happens if you miss the time that you have to put in with your, say, 0 to 5-year-old, if you miss those really important key bonding times and you're not a proper parent where you're doing things like changing their nappies, bathing, doing the bedtime, doing the ill days, doing the sick days when all your child wants to do is sort of stick to you like glue. If you're not doing that, then maybe you feel when your child starts saying, I want, that you have to say yes, because you don't know that your relationship with your child is going to weather those teenage years where your child often turns into a bit of a cretin. And I love my children dearly, and I think I escaped much of the really terrible behaviour. But it's quite natural for your children really to dislike you. In fact, you probably haven't done a very good job if they don't spend some time thinking you're embarrassing, cringy, stupid, out of touch, don't know what you're talking about. And I think that's what's happened with celebrities, that their children come up with something and they have no genuine, true foundational bonds that mean that they can say no to their children. But, that's just as an aside, which, but the other people in culture, like, I think Stephen Kinnock has got a child who is either calls herself non-binary or some sort of trans. And I think you'll find there's probably more politicians than we know. I know Emily Thornberry, for example, she has a niece, I think, who calls herself a boy. And yeah, it is quite silly. I wish celebrities would just go back to getting themselves a chihuahua. That was far more fun.
Yeah, absolutely. A safer bet. What about in terms of this movement, because TERF Ireland, as we are referred to, I think that's a great badge of honour for Britain, has had a global impact. We have shaken things up. I mean, arguably, even Trump's executive order was influenced by a lot of the noise that women have been making in Britain over the past 10 years. How do you see that movement at the moment? Now, I know there are lots of internal battles and differences, as there are in all movements, I guess. And you are often seen as an ultra, too extreme, too outspoken. It always reminds me of that great interview with Germaine Greer on Newsnight, maybe 10 years ago, a long time ago, where she was asked by Kirsty Walk about the trans question. And Kirsty Walk says to her, "Would you ever think of saying anything more ameliorating?" And Germaine Greer just instantly says, "Nope, no way. I'm not going to walk on eggshells." But there are some people who walk on eggshells and there are some people who don't. There are differences of opinion over how accommodating women need to be. How do you see that movement now? Is it really too fractious to be called a movement? How do you view it?
So I think I think it's a broad movement. I think that's been its strength often, that it speaks to lots of different people on lots of different ways. I think many of them have caught up with me. I don't want to sing my own praises here. I think the reason the word adult human female is mine. I decided it was those words in that order rather than adult female human, which is how it kind of appeared in most dictionaries back then. Like, I did that, and that's all over that executive order. So I'm taking 100% of the credit for that particular term. But is it fractious? I think it's always been so. I've always been the outsider. I'm really happy about that. It meant I never had to compromise. There was, I think it's very difficult when you're sat at the comfortable table, the nice shiny table, like being anointed. It's very difficult then to hold your nerve on this issue, and I've definitely done that. So is it fractious? I mean, I think I'm a women's rights campaigner, and this issue is the one that drew me into anything. There are other issues, very pressing issues in this country that I think most women, again, won't touch, that I will just charge and have already charged straight into. And so I don't know if it's any more fractious than it used to be. I don't think it's any more kind of broken than it always has been. There's always been women that have their eye on their next career prize. And they may have done things to ensure that they've got that, and good luck to them. That's what they've done before. That's what they'll do again. And I'm sure they'll do very, very well. For me, it was always about winning this particular fight. And then I stumbled across the Veil, and now I've sort of gone into talking about that as well. But I've also been all over the world. I was recognised in the middle of Rio in January of this year, which was very odd. And I'm recognised in the middle of Washington. And I think my message is, because it's so very clear, and uncompromising and very few words, I think it sort of resonated globally. So I've still got work to do, which I intend to do. But we'll see where TERF Island is in 5 years. I really hope that those who have sort of claimed some sort of professional leadership, I really hope that they don't rest in this sort of accommodating human rights kind of everyone is okay nonsense, because that isn't where I think we need to be at all.
Yeah, I've always seen you as the kind of populist of this movement, which I use the word populist as a compliment, not as an insult like other people do. You know, the kind of street fighter of the movement, and you have played an incredibly important role. I don't think anyone would deny that now, even some of the women who don't like you very much. But in relation to this, I don't want to relitigate the whole thing or anything really, but you know, people who are familiar with this issue will know that some of the TERFs have referred to you as racist. They've called you Islamophobic. I mean, because you talk about grooming gangs, you talk about other issues. They've refused to platform you in certain situations, many situations. What do you think of when people use terms like that to try and demonize someone? I mean, that is an attempt really to destroy a reputation, isn't it? And which is just unfair.
Oh, it's so awfully female though, isn't it? It's a real feminine kind of trashing, no honesty about it. Nobody would debate me. Nobody would sort of sit and tell me even what I'd said that deserved that accusation. And then some of them are kind of pretending that they never really said it. And it was, you know, they didn't really mean it. And it was like a difference of opinion. And I'm like, no, calling me a racist is not a difference of opinion. That's you being awful. And some of them will double down and stick by it. And I say, good luck to them, because I remain consistent and honest. And because I'm not racist, I can talk about the things that they won't talk about, because actually, ironically, they are racist. Because they do think brown people don't have the capacity to behave in the same way as everybody else and don't deserve the same human rights. Otherwise, they wouldn't think that me saying that little girls aged 7 shouldn't be restricted with a scarf around their head, they couldn't possibly see that as racist. So I used to fight these women on it, like when it first happened. And then I just realized it doesn't actually matter what you say. Once that accusation comes, you can't do anything about it, which I think is both the power and the weakness of it. And eventually, if you just hold your nerve long enough and don't say anything, people just see those accusers for what they are, which is often really dishonest and the worst of female behavior. Ironically, feminists that I've encountered in this movement, of which I would never call myself a feminist again, I think I did for about 35 minutes about 7 years ago. But feminists are amongst the most awfully behaved in female kind of behavior patterns of any women I've ever met in my life. In fact, they're probably worse because it's covert and dishonest. I think they're actually worse than some of the just plain old awful men that I've met.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right. Wow. I won't comment on female behavior. I'll leave that to you. I think you're right about the racism thing. That's a really solid point, because whenever I hear people avoiding discussion about rape gangs, or avoiding discussion about radical Islam or Islamist terrorism, I always think you're the one who's being racist, because you want to ring fence supposedly fragile Muslims from talking about some of the problems that exist in their community, which many of them are deeply worried about. But then you have these kind of white liberals saying, we can't possibly talk about this. It's Islamophobic. It will hurt their feelings, which infantilizes brown people far more than those who want an honest discussion. In relation to that, the rape gang question has come back into the news in a huge way this year, starting from January onwards. I often get in trouble when I say this, when I say that feminists haven't spoken on this issue in the way that they should have. And my view is the reason they haven't done that is because they don't want to appear Islamophobic, and maybe they don't care about working class girls as much as they do about other girls. That's my honest opinion in relation to the feminist hierarchy and why they've avoided this issue. Of course, some feminists have talked about it, and I recognize that, but many haven't. What do you think that blind spot tells us in relation to that issue in particular?
That they're more self-serving and interested in their own careers than anything else.
Right.
Like there are literally women call themselves feminists who will talk about manspreading, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Like for hours, and how entitled and mansplaining, but they won't talk about Pakistani Muslim paedophile rape gangs. And I think that is the way to talk about them. They're not Asian. Majority of them aren't Asian. And I think if I was an Indian or a Sikh living in this country and they were called Asian grooming gangs, I'd be mighty annoyed to be sort of put in that category with those men in that particular culture. Even the women that do talk about it do kind of use this appeasing language and gutless language, in my opinion. Well, they'll say, like, yes, there's a problem in this community, but like there's rape everywhere. Well, just stick to that rape, can we? Can we just stick to that rape? And why should we stick to that rape? Well, because they've been told by the police, by the council, by the social workers, by the teachers, by anyone that ever they thought that they could put their hand out and somebody would pull them out of the mess. They were told that they deserved it. All of those victims repeatedly were told that they deserved it, that they didn't deserve justice, that what was happening to them was because they were scum. And so that's why it's unique. Now, I'm not saying that the police have a great record on any rape or any sexual violence, whoever it happens to, and certainly sort of sexual violence within families and so on. We know that that is not good. But this particular thing is more difficult to talk about, which is exactly why I've talked about it. We went and did a Let Women Speak in Oldham, like right into the heart of it. I've never seen so many men in Islamic robes come out to have a look and talk to police and so on when I was there. But, I use these words, Pakistani Muslim paedophile rape gangs, because I think if you can't name it, you can't really talk about it. And it should offend you when you hear those words. You should be totally offended that we live in a country where this has been allowed to go on for decades and decades and nobody wanted to talk about it. Like I often say, the left would rather you be a rapist than a racist.
Yeah, well, that's a powerfully put. And it's so disingenuous, I think, when feminists or anyone else, when they say, why are you focusing on this one instance of child sexual abuse or child sexual exploitation or whatever that we call it, pedophilia? Whereas the question really is, why haven't you people focused on it ever? Why did you exclude these girls from Me Too? Why did you not take their claims, their accusations and their stories seriously? Why did you downplay it for so long? So the question is not why are we focusing on it so much now, but why didn't officialdom talk about it for 20 years? Do you think there's a class element to this? Because, I can't help casting my mind back to, Me Too uncovered a lot of very serious, bad and criminal behavior by influential, powerful men. There's no question about that. But it also flagged up things that I think were, in the scheme of things, relatively minor. So a politician putting his hand on a journalist's knee, or a politician using rude, possibly misogynistic language, all those things which we all agree are bad behavior, but they're not crimes in the grand scheme of things. So for years, we were subjected to stories about, Oxbridge women having a hand on the knee, while at the same time, working class girls and often very poor girls were being abused in the most extraordinary way. We knew it was happening and it was very rarely on the front pages of the papers. I mean, there's got to be a class angle to that, hasn't there?
Oh, I think there's so much that's a class angle, isn't it? Even the whole trans rights thing. It's all a class issue. It's all a way to just ignore the voices of predominantly women. But I think the victims of grooming gangs are kind of like the female equivalent of cannon fodder, right? We can, oh, look at those terrible men with their flags. Aren't they so scummy and awful? Oh, we want to send some people to the front line. Who will those people be, I wonder? Oh, it'll be those amazing, aren't they amazing, those men? They're so brave and courageous. Don't let them fly the flag. All of that is just like so class-based, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. When it comes to those particular girls, it just strikes me that things can happen, and apparently they're not as bad as if you say that they're happening. Like that, we can all, well, I try not to visualize, but a 13-year-old girl with the best looking of the family, going and grooming her and picking her up in his nice car and plying her with drugs and drink, and then taking her eventually, like leading her down this path of months of grooming behavior to be in a room with adult men who torture her and rape her and injure her body and serve her back up into that care home, where everybody, when she walks back into that care home, they know what's happened to her all weekend. They know. And nobody talks about it. But then they would talk about probably their leery boss who said that someone had a nice buttocks, right? It's so grotesque and sickening. So yes, it is a class thing. I think Emily Maitlis said to Rupert Lowe in an interview about the Pakistani paedophile grooming rape gangs, and she said something about him being a racist. And my first thought was like, okay, let's say he is. Did they still get raped? Were they still passed around? Were they tortured? Were their families kind of threatened with being beaten up or worse? Yes, they were. So in the grand scheme of things, let's say his focus is because he is a racist, which I don't think he is at all. But let's say it is. So what?
Yeah, it's, it is extraordinary. I remember movements like Everyday Feminism would flag up things like, the waiter giving the bill to your boyfriend rather than you. I mean, I'm not making this up. There were articles about things like this and how reflective it was of the patriarchy. Some of those same influential feminists who did that are now saying nothing about the rape and torture and in some cases murder of working class girls by gangs of men. I mean, it is simply extraordinary. Okay, Kellie-Jay, my last question for you, which ties all these different things together, I guess, which is, I wanted to ask you about the fate of wokeness or the fate of political correctness or whatever the hell we're meant to call it. But I think people generally know what you're talking about when you use words like that. We're talking about the trans ideology, cancel culture, accusations of racism, even where racism doesn't exist, always designed to shut down debate about difficult topics. All these different things that have come together to create this kind of authoritarian, divisive culture that some of us refer to as wokeness because it's easy shorthand. Is that going the way of the dodo? Is that on its way out? We know that the trans issue is in trouble. We know that you can't really get away with just shouting Islamophobia at people these days, although they still try. Cancel culture is not as prominent as it might have been 5 or 6 years ago. I'm not sure that you would have encountered a feral mob if you went to New Zealand today. I could be wrong on that, but it feels like things are changing. Or maybe you would encounter a feral mob, but there'd be a mob on your side as well, perhaps. A proper street fight. Do you see that stuff withering away? It's under pressure. How do you think it's going to play out?
Well, it's got to wither away because it's not true. And I think that more visible things. So wokeness relies on the whole idea of saying things but not doing things. Like it's if somebody does something and says something, believe what they do, not what they say, right? Behavior is a language. And I think that more people will be faced with things that they're not supposed to see and they're not supposed to know, that they can see it right in front of their very eyes. Migration, we are not allowed to, we have to pretend it's the most wonderful thing in all cases. It's just great if you get a nice migrant hotel because what a wonderful workforce where blah, 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 blah. And I think more people will see that simply isn't true. And so that's why wokeness will die, because wokeness isn't true. And there won't be enough people to defend wokeness because the people that defend it are the people that aren't impacted by the implications and consequences of wokeness. There are people who can choose the nice schools and they can choose the gyms and they can, they have a quite charmed life where they don't have to get a bus late at night or They're not worried about their mortgage, so they don't have to suffer particular employment where all this, where they have to share spaces with men or whatever. But I think this will just impact more people, and I don't think anyone will defend it. Recently, for example, on the whole wokeness and my accusations, if I can talk about this, I did a 7-second video where I said to 2 girls at Speaker's Corner who were veiled, and I said, free your faces, free yourselves, ladies, free your faces. And it's been viewed 24 million times. And I now have hundreds of stories from women across the Middle East, like I am now, a woman, who's been called Islamophobic so many times by the rabid lefty women in this country. And now I'm seen as like a little more sort of hope for the women across the Middle East who are writing to me to tell me how we just need to expose this. So I think the Palestine Hamas marches, people are watching those marches and they're like, well, they don't feel peaceful. They feel like a kind of a stamp of authority, and they feel like a bit of an invasion, and they feel like they're getting away with behavior and words and language that I can't. And, up with this, I will not put. So I'm in Ireland. Have you seen some of these sort of massive, great big complexes they're building? And I think there's one in Wales. And so, yeah, I think this government is going to push wokeness so far in our faces and down our throats that everyone's going to choke, and then it will have to end. Hopefully, we'll all get rather angry. Maybe we'll even be a bit French, and we will just say, right, no, that's enough now. That's enough. No.
Kellie-Jay, thank you very much.
Thank you.